Welcome to Clause 8, the #1 podcast on intellectual property, trusted by top in-house counsel, judges, and policymakers worldwide. Hosted by Eli Mazour, we bring you in-depth conversations with the personality shaping IP. Brought to you by TradeSpace, where ideas take flight.
So today we're lucky to be joined by David Jones and Jeff Hantson. Dave is, of course, Executive Director of HTIA, which is represents lots of the big tech companies on patent issues, and favorite of Clause 8, third-time returning guest. And he actually suggested that we should record this one with Jeff, which is a high honor. So maybe can you tell us how you met Jeff? And
wow, how did I meet? I think Jeff and I met, was it the 101 roundtable pre-COVID?
I
marched up to you and said, tell your boss to stop using these crappy statistics. They're all wrong. And you're like, oh, what am I going to do? You know, I think that's my first number. Is that?
It was the Section 101 roundtables back in 2018, 2019, something like that. Yeah, so it's a long time ago now.
Yeah. So we'll have to return to that 101. And so you were a litigator, a patent litigator. How did you end up on the Hill? What's the
going back a little further before that, even I was an electrical engineer coming out of undergrad and worked for Lockheed Martin for a few years before going to law school. And, coming out of law school, became a patent litigator, first at Bingham McCutcheon. And then
were you exposed to patents at Lockheed?
A little bit at Lockheed. When I went to law school, I can't say that I planned on being a patent litigator, but in my first year, as I was paying for law school myself, they said, just so you all know, first year law students don't get summer jobs. Oh, unless you're an engineer, they need patent litigators. So I decided, well, maybe I should take a look at this. So I was at WilmerHale for a number of years, clerked at the Federal Circuit, and had always really wanted to work on the Hill. It's one of the reasons I came to DC and went to Georgetown Law. Figured I was getting at a point in my career, if I didn't try it then, I was never going to get the opportunity. So was lucky enough to land a position with Senator Hirono from Hawaii and was in the Senate for 7 years. It was great.
Who's known as a pro-patent voice.
She is. So I worked for her when I was hired, I had met with some other people who work in the Senate. They had actually shared my resume with Senator Hirono's office because they had said, we're looking for somebody who knows something about patents, which I don't think happens on the Hill very often.
Not very often, yeah.
My background actually came in handy, and I think there was no one else in the office. Not only did they not know about patents, they didn't want to know about patents, so they were happy to bring me aboard.
So what is her interest in patents? Where is that?
I never got a straight answer of where that interest came from. I think a lot of it is she's a really creative person. She has a lot of hobbies of, making cards or paper or origami. And I think she just feels like a kindred spirit with the creative community. And, she groups inventors in with that. And so, has always been a big supporter of the patent system and been really one of the most engaged members in the IP subcommittee for the full time I was there.
That's good to hear. As your old boss, Warren Hatch, he thought people who had copyrights were important because he wrote a book and wrote songs, but he didn't.
Patents too. I mean, I care about patents.
But
there was the whole Hatch-Waxman Act.
Yeah.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, I think that's something that he did.
Yeah. We had Congressman Waxman on to tell the story of how difficult it was to convince Senator Hatch to come to a reasonable compromise. But I guess you were a litigator. Obviously, WilmerHale, I guess, has a reputation. I guess Apple is a client that's associated in litigation. Did you have any strong views about patents or the patent system? And what year was this? This was in...
So I think I joined Wilmer in 2012 and was there until, like I said, I took 1 year when I clerked at the Federal Circuit, but otherwise was there until 2018.
Yeah.
They certainly, I worked for, Apple was a client when I was there, but I also represented a number of big pharma companies. So more on the plaintiff side of things, enforcing patents. So I got a little taste of it on all sides, which was nice. And I feel like, Dave jokes that I worked for Senator Hirono, Senator Durbin, who are both on kind of the
very biased
side of the debate. But, I think I like to think that I came to these things with a nuanced view, and sure, I'd represent what my boss's position was, but tried to see the other side and kind of work through these issues as best I could.
He really did, actually. I have to give him that. He's one of the only staffers who read academic articles I sent him and actually understand them, debate them with me.
So were you interested in when you were going on the Hill? You were I want to go work for a senator who's pro-patent or work for a senator? Did you have something like that in mind, or were you kind of open to?
If I'm going to be honest, I just wanted to come and work on the Hill.
Yeah.
And I used kind of my patent knowledge and experience as an entree.
Okay.
I probably would have, I had sent applications to lots of other offices as well. It just really lucked out the way that it did. So I was pretty fortunate.
No, that's a cool story. I guess we'll probably come back to the Hill, but last question, anything, I guess, about that experience that you took away that maybe surprised you or?
It's for one, I'd say probably my favorite thing about working on the Hill on issues like patents are that they aren't partisan, right? I mean, there are certainly divisions of people who view these things, but when folks think of Capitol Hill too often now, it's Republicans butting heads with Democrats, not finding ways to work together. One of my best friends on the Hill was Brad Watts in Senator Tillis's office. Others on the Republican side I used to work with all the time. So I think that's something that people, they don't realize when they think about Capitol Hill too often.
Brad Watts had a similar thing when he was on Clause 8. So it was great to hear. And as we were talking before the interview, you mentioned Senator Durbin being pro-patent. So I want to give him credit because I guess the inventors of Bionic Wrench and those who listen to Clause 8 might know their story. They said when they dealt with Senator Durbin's office, the staff there, I think even the chief of staff were sympathetic to her story and what happened to them. So it's a credit to them.
It's a great, Senator, I worked for Senator Durbin for 3 years and he's got a great team. They were there. So many people have been with him for years and years because he's just a good guy. It's a good staff. They take their constituent concerns really seriously and try to dig into it. So I could imagine they were treated right.
Yeah, and I was surprised because I was like, isn't he like number 2? What would he care about patent issues? But
he cares about constituents. That's what he cares about.
All right, well, let's talk about what's going on today. I guess we're in the middle of this new administration. Maybe Dave, you can share, since we last had you on, I guess, what did you expect to happen and how does that compare to what's happening in terms of patent policy?
I don't think I expected this. It's big changes very, very quickly with, as far as I can tell, very little transparency. So concerning from a stakeholder perspective.
I guess maybe we could start, what did you expect, I guess?
Because I didn't really know what to expect. I guess I expected it to be more like Director Iancu. Like I kind of expected a return to the like Fintiv would come back, a few other things, but I expected maybe a more incremental approach because it's not like Andre's like a shy guy or like super risk averse. So he was kind of my, in my mind, I thought, okay, that's probably what we're going to have to deal with. And it's turned out not to be so much like that.
And what do you think kind of led to this point? Like, why are they taking a different approach than Iancu?
I think it's probably Secretary. I don't know, but I think it's probably Secretary Lutnick. I think he seems to have strong views on patents.
And I guess maybe do you think they learned something from the Iancu experiences? Are they trying to do something that's going to be like? Do you think what they're doing now is going to be, I guess, more last beyond this administration, or like because obviously like Kathy Vidal came in and she was like, all right, let's just undo everything that Iancu did.
No, she did not, unfortunately. I wish she had. She did like little workarounds, like compelling merits, although I love Kathy. Well, last beyond this administration, I actually have two distinct views on that. I'm not convinced that like new precedents, new processes will really last. I do think that the depopulation of the PTAB will last. I think it's going to be hard to get people to go back and work there at this point, at least in the near term. So I think there'll certainly be kind of longer term effects.
Yeah, I think I was saying that before people thought, well, you come to a PTAB and you stay there and you get to be a judge. But now I guess you now know another administration might come in and might change their mind about that. So might not be as attractive. Jeff, I guess you were still on the Hill, or?
Yeah, I was on the Hill until July of this year. So, went through, saw some of these changes as they were burgeoning up and now looking from the outside, I guess.
And I guess you must have been hearing about maybe some of the unhappiness that led to. So I guess what did you expect to happen? I guess similar question.
I think, initially after the election, I think, similar to Dave we saw, the steps that Director Iancu had taken, whether it be some of the, Section 101 guidance, things like FinTIV and the like around PTAB. So yeah, I think I probably thought that it would shift in that way when it was clear that, Howard Lutnick was going to become the Commerce Secretary. He obviously is a patent holder and has his particular views. So I expected him to be a little more hands-on. So was curious to see how that would go. If I remember in his confirmation hearing, he talked a bit about patents and his interest in that subject. So I guess it didn't surprise me that things moved somewhat quickly, though I was surprised by how much was done under an acting director. Usually when there's an acting director in place, they kind of just keep things steady until a confirmed director is in place. So I was surprised that acting director Stewart did as much as she did. And that's, similar to Dave, I assumed that was being done with the blessing of Secretary Lutnick.
Make patents great again.
Make patents great again. Yeah.
So I guess maybe rewind even the past, the AIA passes, they implement it, and, PTAB is called the Death Squad. And now it's 15 years later, there seems a lot of unhappiness with it. And, you were on the Hill as they were trying to pass PERA to rein that in, and none of that has kind of worked. Do you think there's an alternative history where, maybe Dave, you first, an alternative history where, maybe, some compromise could have been reached before this, that?
I doubt it. I really doubt it. The patent owner side has felt very, very strongly over the years about anything that interferes with their ability to assert patents. And so that included the old inter-parties re-exam process. The kind of director-ordered re-exams are very controversial when they happen. So I think almost anything that happened to the office was going to probably be pretty controversial.
I guess let's start with that. Coke-Morton Stewart, obviously, I think she had a pretty strong vision of about patents and the state of a system of her own, and that the main thing she did that's I think most controversial, and correct me if I'm wrong, is her role in discretionary denials and this new policy of, I guess, or theory of settled expectations, where on a broad strokes, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will, is somebody got a patent a bunch of years ago, and they had an expectation that it's an enforceable patent, maybe through previous litigation or...
Not at first. At first, they don't have the expectation. Magically, around year 6, it develops.
Yeah. Depending on the situation, they balance all the factors very carefully.
Mostly the year 6, it seems like. But
yeah. But let's, I guess, maybe do an example. Somebody has a patent for 12 years. They've been, successfully on a successful... campaign to, license their technology. Is it reasonable for them not to have to go through a whole PTAB situation?
I guess, it's taking a measured approach like that of, maybe looking at something, not just how long has the patent been enforced, but how has it been used? You mentioned, like a history of licensing, or, does this company produce a product and they've been enforcing their patent to keep people off the market? I could see a world where looking at factors like that and making a determination of, are there settled expectations you might want to take into account? I'd have to go back and look at the cases where this settled expectations prong has been applied. It doesn't seem like that type of nuanced view is being taken. And, I think all of us who have, litigated in this space recognize that oftentimes you have patents that have kind of sat dormant. Maybe they were with one company, got sold to another company. It's not till years down the road that anybody really becomes aware of it and sees it enforced. And it's, what settled expectations do you have there? It's hard to understand why just the passage of time would necessarily create these settled expectations. So, I'm sure we'll talk about, things that Director Iancu did of, conserving, PTAB resources and whatnot. I think any director should want to, take in these factors in making these considerations. These bright lines, I think, are maybe a little bit more difficult to defend, I think.
Well, let's add another factor. Let's say it was previously challenged at the PTAB. I guess, Dave, are you receptive to that form of settled expectations?
Well, it depends. I mean, how well did the first entity that litigated at the PTAB do? I mean, did they really find the prior? Did they do much searching? Did they put a lot of, I mean, there are reasons that non-mutual collateral estoppel has all sorts of limitations, for due process reasons, where they have to be similarly situated. They have to, litigate it to final judgment. They have to have, sufficient motivation to litigate the issue. It has to be necessary to the final judgment. So in the kind of normal sense of like Anglo-American law, it doesn't make much sense to me to say, okay, well, somebody else challenged this, somebody totally unrelated to you challenged this at the PTAB, and now you can, nobody else can challenge. There was just kind of this one and done approach. Just doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
And this is one of the points where Dave and I used to have, I want to say, some of our deepest conversations. The two members that I worked for, Senator Hirono, Senator Durbin, they co-sponsored PREVAIL. And before that, they co-sponsored Stronger. And before that, they co-sponsored Strong, which had some of these kind of more one and done type provisions. And, I'd listen to Dave and I share some of the concerns he might have about what that might do with gamesmanship or something, kind of a patent owner lining up some party initially, going after them. So it'll be a weak challenge in the PTAB. I can share some concerns there, and maybe there's a way to address that. But kind of how I'd always, in representing my boss's positions and talking to Dave about this, it's should the PTO at some point be done with evaluating the validity of this patent? They granted the patent. Maybe it's been to the PTAB once. Maybe it's been to the PTAB twice. At what point can we draw a line and say, look, you can still challenge this in district court, but the PTO is out of this business? And I think we never really were able to dig deeply into that prong and see if there was a point of compromise. But I think, I understand his view of, one and done is, too strong of a thing, but on the other side, it's, well, shouldn't the PTO be out of this business at some point?
But that raises an interest. Like, why should PTO be out of the business? If you can bring all these challenges in court, as long as the different parties can all challenge the patent in court, what makes the PTO any different? And the only thing I could ever see that was different is people didn't want to be in front of the PTAB. They wanted to be in an East Texas jury.
But correct me if I'm wrong, the argument for that PTAB was never that, we should create a new forum where it's easier to invalidate a patent. In terms of different standard, it's cheaper and faster.
More accurate, typically.
Well, now, but when the argument was made for the PTAB, and now I guess maybe another factor that I guess they take into account is obviously a trial data set that's before the PTAB proceeding, and this has happened. A jury sometimes rules favorably for the patent owner, and then these former litigators at the PTAB, decide that this inventor didn't have it right. I mean, is that like? Do you think that at least that should there be a bright line rule somewhere there that, all right, if there's going to be a trial and they're going to have a jury and both parties are going to spend money on this, is that a settled expectation?
You could have a bright line rule as long as it goes both ways.
Yeah.
So if the patent owner ever tries to enforce their patent and is unsuccessful, then they're just done. One and done on both sides.
Well, I think that's true, right? Once it's invalidated, it's invalidated.
No, if you lose on infringement, you can never go back to court against another party to try to argue infringement. One and done. I mean, the people in the IPRs are bringing different evidence to the PTO.
That is interesting. I wonder how often that happens. I'm guessing once somebody loses, they never get to litigate that patent again.
If they lose on infringement, I could definitely see them trying to enforce it.
Whoever's funding that looks quickly
be unhappy, probably.
After a 10-year journey to that. Well, I guess, obviously when Stewart made those changes, and now, during the confirmation of John Squires, you publicly said you were looking forward to working with him, I guess.
Yeah, I was lying.
How has it been going? And I guess what do you think about his first few months?
So I have actually known Director Squires now for, 20 years-ish. I haven't been in that close of contact with him the last decade, but we used to see each other quite often. And I've always liked him. I'd like him a lot. He's very easy to deal with. He's just a personable guy. He's reasonable. His policy positions concern me a little bit, but Him personally, I actually really like him.
Well, I guess let's talk about the policy positions. I guess now his change is that, I guess the memo that they put out, or is that right? I'm not sure the right word.
Edict.
Yeah, that he looked at the statute and said, actually the director is the one who could make these institution decisions, which I think in some ways kind of, at least I remember a previous director once said, somebody was complaining about the PTAB and they said, well, that's above my pay grade, right? John Squires, to his credit, you agree or disagree, he's taking complete ownership of whatever the institution decisions are. And actually, Kokomo and Stewart, made a point to be about that. I guess on a practical level, do you think this kind of changes anything? The fact that
Director Squires is going to review 1,200 petitions a year
yeah.
in his free time. I think it changes something.
Well, the number of petitions will go down probably, right? So.
Yeah, I imagine. I don't know. It's interesting. So when we were in the run up to the kind of the AIA, there was a very, very, very strong norm at the PTO where they did not interfere with the board at all. I remember when I was at Microsoft, we were really upset about some ex-party decisions on 101. And, I called up and yelled at Bob Stoll, yelled at John Whalen, yelled at anybody he could find. And, I remember John telling me, he was solicitor of the PTO at the time. He's like, I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. All I can do is refuse to defend the decision if it goes up to the federal circuit. It's like, that's it. And, Bob Stoll told me the same thing, is we don't mess with the board.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an adjudicatory function. So we don't, we just don't. So I think that's why, statutes are always written to give almost always written to give the political actor the decision, right?
Yeah.
On the assumption that it's going to be delegated. And here that assumption was really strong because it always had been, right? As far as I can remember, I can't think of a situation, maybe Thomas Jefferson days or something, but I can't think of a situation where the director, him or herself, was making granular decisions about, no more than they actually make the patentability decision with respect to every one of the, 360,000 patents that are issued every year.
And that's, Director Squires kind of reclaiming this authority to make the institution decisions. Statutorily, there's nothing wrong with that. It's what's written in the statute. He has the ability to do that. I think Dave's point is a good one. It's just, is this what the director should be spending their time on? Do they have the bandwidth to be reviewing these things? And if he's going to reclaim that authority, what type of review are these things actually getting, right? I know you talked about how in the early days, the PTAB was called the Patent Death Squad. And, the most recent statistics I saw on Patently the other day of, the 34 institution decisions that have been made since the director reclaimed this authority, none have been instituted. And it's, I don't think that's the right answer either, right? This system was put in place by Congress for a reason. You could agree with it or not, but they did create this. And have we now, turned it into a nullity?
And to be fair to Director Squires, it's too early, I think, for us to see,
of course,
decisions kind of instituting, because he's doing the merits as well as the discretion piece. So I assume I would hope at some point we'll see a few institution decisions from Director Squires. But at this point, we just see a bunch of IPR numbers and all denied.
No, I know. Actually, I have a friend who interviewed at the PTAB and became a judge, but he said, I think it's Judge Smith or whoever it was, is that right? The first judge, but he was asked,
Judge Smith.
But he asked him a question. If the director came to your office and told you to change the decision, what would you say? And the right answer was obviously, no, I will not change the decision. But then what they did is they formed these super panels. I forget what they're called. And, everybody knows who's in charge.
Not under Smith, though. I think he really, really was committed to that. That was a standard interview question. He was, he worked his guts out of that job. He really did. Later on, some of that started happening, where reassignments and the kind of panel members, or the director deciding, hey, I'm a member of the PTAB too.
Yeah.
And I think, to that point, the Supreme Court decided that it's ultimately the director who has to be making these decisions, and it's just a question of, let's at least do it transparently, right? Is somebody pulling strings behind the scenes to make this look like it was handled properly? And I know, Dave and others had worked with, Senator Leahy and others to, try to develop greater transparency along these lines. That's the important thing. make sure we understand what's happening here so that parties go in with their eyes open and know, what their chances are and how these things are going to be handled.
So I know, I think some of your members, and I think HTA itself filed a lawsuit to maybe...
I don't think we were a party, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, you were amicus brief, but the members were, and it seems like the Federal Circuit didn't side with them, I guess, on trying to rein in some of these changes.
Not so far, yeah.
Yeah. What's next, I guess? What do you think?
Well, there's still, I think, 4 outstanding mandamus petitions, although it doesn't look good based on...
I was going to say, you're quite the optimist after the first 3 went down.
I actually have never been optimistic about the mandamus petitions. Mandamus is
it's a hard standard.
Really, really hard. And it's showing like clear entitlements and this. It was always going to be challenging. So I think the rest will almost certainly fail, although I could be missing something. It's kind of weird that it took 5 months for any of them to get from when the first ones were filed. I think it's been 5 months. They were just sitting there, which is not, as I recall, normal practice on the federal circuit. Usually with mandamus petitions, the kind of motions panel would take care of it and
pretty quickly, usually
so like a month, maybe, or less. So there was a lot of speculation. Something else was going on there. I don't know if there is or isn't.
As former federal circuit clerks, do you think some judges interested in that case is delaying is that
I was going to say it's tough to say. I mean, the 3 came out. They're they have reasoning, but they're not super long opinions, nor would you expect them to be. So it's like Dave when it was this time was passing, more of these mandamus petitions were building. It was like, maybe something really is going to happen here. When the first 3 just recently came out and denied the petitions, pretty straightforwardly. I don't have I wouldn't have a lot of optimism if I filed those other 4 petitions, but, maybe that time frame did mean something and we'll find out otherwise soon. I don't know. It's tough to read those tea leaves.
But you couldn't really have hoped for a better panel. Like Judge Dyke authored one of those opinions. And if there's anybody who's really going to have concerns and who I think knows a lot about administrative law, it's Judge Dyke.
Yeah.
Not that the others don't know administrative law, but he, if I had to guess, he would have been the one who'd have them probably.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I'll get a phone call if I don't say this. I would trust Judge Chen to come
Judge
out
Chen is
to handle things
He
appropriately.
always
that was who I clerked for.
He's
but Judge Dyke is also
Judge Prost is wonderful. But Judge Chen, we have this running thing where I ask him who are the 3 funniest judges on the federal circuit. He always says, "Well, me, of course."
Actually, I don't know if you saw, but Robert F. Kennedy asked, I forget, another cabinet member who's the funniest on the cabinet, and they said, "Well, of course, Donald Trump is."
Goes without saying.
That's right.
You both worked in government, so
we know how these things work.
So we were, you were mentioning how you and Dave used to discuss these issues about the PTAB when you were on the Hill, and I asked Dave for his alternative history. You mentioned, these were bipartisan issues, and I'm sure your side with the PREVAIL, they were trying to convince the other side, let's come to some agreement. Senator Coons modified the bill over time. Do you see an alternative history where you're like, they should have listened to us and reach some compromise where we could have had a PTAB, which both sides accepted a little more?
It's tough to envision it, to be honest with you. There are, the PTAB's not that old in the grand scheme of things. It takes time for it to shake out and for people to get up to speed. But frankly, and Dave might be able to talk about the efforts to actually pass the AIA and how long that took. It takes a while to get members engaged on patent issues. There aren't a whole lot of people who came to the Senate, or I'm sure the House, I haven't worked in the House, but who came to the Senate to work on patent issues. And so trying to get, staff engaged was hard enough. Trying to get members engaged, even harder. So it's really tough to envision something having happened without some calamity, right? I mean, if what's happening at the PTO now, if truly it's an O for now, nothing gets instituted, maybe Congress will say we need to do something. But the way things were operating, we'd get complaints from either side. There were a handful of members who were really engaged and wanted to see if they could make some changes. But there wasn't really the critical mass to truly try to get something done.
And I never got the sense that the bill, well, your boss was one of the bill sponsors, but kind of the main sponsors had that much interest in compromise. Maybe I read the room wrong, but there were certainly discussions, but the compromises were not significant in my view. I mean, it's hard to call it a compromise.
No, and part of it may just be it never built up enough momentum where you had to start making those compromises to get the next handful of votes to get it across the finish line. So it was
without losing the votes you had before. Right?
Well, even that, I mean, just you weren't there yet where you were actually heading towards, potential passage.
Yeah.
We got it through the Senate Judiciary. We got the PREVAIL Act through the Judiciary Committee last Congress by a pretty, narrow margin. And there you did see some changes around the margins on standing and a few other things when members raised concerns about what would this mean to, generic drugs trying to come on the market or something. I think it would take, a real effort of this is a real thing that might actually pass when you'd have to start making those real compromises to get it in a place that it could get across the Senate floor.
But I don't think it would go. I think best case scenario, you'd wind up with both sides hating the bill rather than just one side. I don't think that there was I didn't see a compromise that would work.
And maybe you could share some backstory of this, but I thought that vote was interesting because I think it passed by one vote, the PREVAIL Act, and two senators, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who are not associated with being, I guess on the big tech side.
They're very pro big tech. I hear. I don't know them personally, but
they both chose to vote against the bill for two different sets of reasons. Josh Hawley was, I guess, believed some of the propaganda out there about how it hurt generics, and that Cruz thought it didn't go far enough. So I guess what was your experience, I guess, even getting that over the line of judiciary? Was that kind of...
It was a heavy lift. I can't remember exactly how many weeks it was on the agenda for. The way things work in the Judiciary Committee, you list something on the agenda, any member has the ability to hold it over to pass the vote, for 1 week. And usually you're set up to pass it that following week. So you'll see things on the agenda for 2 weeks. You see that with judges, you see it with legislation. PREVAIL was on, and PERA for a time were on the markup agenda for much longer than that. I forget exactly how many weeks. But it was because there were all these conversations happening behind the scenes of, is this member going to vote for it or not? Well, what if I make this tweak? So it was a challenge to build a majority on the committee to feel comfortable with it. I think you heard from several members at the markup that they were willing to vote it out of committee, but they still had some concerns. So they weren't ready to vote for it on the floor. So even that product that came out of committee, enough members had raised concerns that there would have to be more work before it could be advanced to the floor.
I'm just curious because obviously before, I don't know, at least that's my read of the situation, Tillis kind of has, his interest in pound interest has grown and weighted based on them failing. But I think he was demoralized in some way because I think he did think there could be some possibility. But in the beginning of this Congress, he was like very, he made a big splash and a big announcement. Is there a reason he might have thought that something might happen this Congress before the administration? Is there something?
It's obviously, the administration has taken a position, particularly around the PTAB, that they're doing behind the scenes, whether or not they would, kind of put their weight behind something like PREVAIL. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Even though it aligns with a lot of what they're doing now. Senator Tillis, I always enjoyed, working with both him and his staff. He's put a lot of effort into the IP space. He helped resurrect the IP subcommittee when he was chair. He was very active. We could all talk about the Section 101 hearings that lasted 3 days with 45 witnesses. Those are things you don't see anymore in the Senate, And he's formed a great partnership with Senator Coons, now with Senator Schiff as the ranking member. And he is a real optimist of, I want to get things done in the Senate. That's why I'm here. And I'm sure he wants to see, whether it be PERA, that he's the lead sponsor of, or something else in the IP space, get passed before he leaves at the end of this Congress. Yeah. So I can see him leaning on a lot of his colleagues that he has good relationships with who might otherwise be on the fence of, look, this is important to me. Let's try to get it through. So I'm glad he's optimistic on a lot of these things. I don't know that I quite share his level of optimism, but that's what it takes if you want to try to get something done. It's not easy in the Senate.
Well, I think it's interesting. Going back to PREVAIL, maybe I think you both agree that there is an alternative history where it could have happened before, but Dave, are you starting to hear from maybe any of your members? Oh, maybe that PREVAIL wasn't that bad. It's better than what's going on there now.
Nope. Not really. I mean, no, I'm not. So I don't know that PREVAIL. I mean, I've seen so many versions of strong, stronger, and not strongest, which still bugs me because but PREVAIL. I forget which is which and what's in each, but my recollection is that I don't think PREVAIL would actually have been better than the proposed rule. I mean, either way, you're basically, a huge portion of the IPRs that my members care about would not be instituted.
No, and I mean, and there are a lot of similarities between, the NPRM that's out now and what PREVAIL would have done. And I think, at this point, I don't know why members would rally behind PREVAIL if they already see the PTO doing this. And any other member who might have been willing to work and develop a compromise, might now be aggravated by the fact that the PTO is doing this administratively when Congress has been wrestling with it for so long that I find it hard to believe that they're all of a sudden going to, jump on board and get involved here.
Yeah. I guess, from my, at least, it's early in the administration. We're not even a year in. As you mentioned, there's 34 denials. Oh, yes. Sorry.
A lot more than 34.
Yeah.
Just 34 in the last week.
Yeah. And, if being on the losing side of these is really so bad, do you think do you think there is going to be an opening for maybe some kind of compromise legislatively or an interest at least to say, hey, maybe we should change the law so we can have something that maybe more, a bigger portion of the PANA community or whatever, or the stakeholders could be fine with, I guess, is there?
I don't think that's possible, but I mean, sure. If people want to do legislation and it's helpful, then we're always happy to chat. I mean, it does seem like a strange, so the problem from my perspective is that the PTO is largely disregarding the statute. I mean, like the actual statutory factors that limit institution, things like the 1 year time bar, there's several others. When's the last time you saw one of those be dispositive of an institution decision? They just don't, like the statutory factors and kind of the procedural rules in the statute just are literally virtually never being applied. So it strikes me as an odd solution to the problem that PTO is not applying the statute to pass another statute for them to ignore. I mean, I think there would have to be, there would have to be a number of things that would guarantee that the statute would actually be applied. And I think those things would be non-starters for the other side. I mean, you'd have to have, like, for example, appeals of institution decisions or no institution phase at all, neither of which I can see the other side going.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Dave makes the point about, kind of the considerations that the statute has set for the institution phase. But when you make it non-reviewable, there's a lot of discretion that then comes into play, whether you intended that or not. There's no real check on the director making those calls. So that's what put us in the place we are.
But we didn't think it was going to be quite this unreviewable, honestly. Plus, Dave Capo said it would be fine. He said they would never use it politically. And he didn't, to his credit.
So it seems the things at the federal circuit aren't promising. You don't think, I guess, anything legislatively will work? I guess, is the just kind of wait and see what happens? Is that kind of the mood among those unhappy with what's happening at the USPTO?
I mean, I guess for me, I mean, a lot of the companies, that are most impacted by what's going on at the PTO, most negatively impacted, they're interfacing with the administration on a whole host of issues.
Yeah.
And I think if we've seen anything, they've demonstrated that they can, get some of the things they want. So I think it's a question of when does this issue kind of bubble up to a high enough priority that they start to lean on the administration about what's going on here. We're not there yet, I don't think, but it'll be interesting to see as more numbers come out, as more cases are having to go through the district court route and the expense and the time that's associated with that, of if more companies want to engage at higher levels of the administration to see if they can get some of these things reversed.
Yeah, I basically told my companies that's more or less their only hope. Is to, there are only about 6 or 7 people who can help them, in my estimation. Seriously, in the administration. And I've told them, if you really want to stop this, you got to go send a CEO or a general counsel to talk to one of those 6 or 7 people.
But it's at a time when, those companies are going to the administration to talk about tariffs and export controls and all these other things. They have to figure out, where does the PTAB line up with that? And it may, maybe they're getting there, but it may take a little more time before that bubble's completely up.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to compete. I mean, you've got people discussing $1 billion kind of tax breaks, to build the CHIPS Act, they like to build semiconductor fabs. Well, the PTAB's going to, if it goes away, it's going to cost some of these companies a lot of money, but not $1 billion a year. Yeah, but a few $100 million possibly.
That's interesting because it reminds me, first time I interviewed you, there was a big push for antitrust legislation, and we were, I think you mentioned how patent issues might not be as important relative to that, but now it seems, I guess, probably the issues maybe are even more existential or pressing. Those just legislative proposals. So it seems, I guess maybe on PERA on 101 side, do you see a more opening there? Since I guess maybe some of the members are not as aggravated.
I think on 101, the thing I'll say is where, Dave talked about with PREVAIL that he didn't feel there was a lot of compromise, and there's been a lot of work that's gone into 101. Dave mentioned the first time we met, it was at these roundtables back in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, and lots of stakeholders involved, a lot of staff time involved. And I felt at the time that we were building momentum toward some sort of, maybe we never would have reached a consensus, but we were building kind of a critical mass toward a reform that touched on 101. It also had some tweaks to 112 and other areas, so that we're getting to that real sense of compromise where nobody loves it, but they're getting something. At one point, all the parties kind of retreated to their corners. That kind of fell by the wayside. It was restarted during COVID, kind of virtual, roundtables or town halls, whatever you want to call it. I felt like not everybody, I think Dave did a great job of trying to, deal with, I don't want to say opponents, but people on the other side. Others had really dug in on their positions and were not interested in compromise at all. You wound up with PERA that I think I don't want to put words in Dave's mouth, but he thinks that really favors one side over the other. I don't necessarily disagree that much with him there. It's similar to what was presented by one of the sides. But there have been hearings. Senator Tillis has said he wants to, reconstitute some working groups because he wants to get something done.
And to be fair, some didn't think PERA went far enough in terms
That's
of
true.
Yeah.
I'm probably not terribly optimistic that we're going to get there by the end of this Congress, but I don't doubt Senator Tillis's willingness to engage here and try to find a solution. And I don't doubt that he's going to push his colleagues, whether it be Senator, Chairman Grassley, to put it on the markup agenda, his other colleagues to vote for it. I just know when we moved PREVAIL out of the Judiciary Committee, PERA was on the agenda as well. It was ultimately pulled off the agenda because there wasn't enough support. And this is a space that's complicated. Members and their staff don't necessarily, all the members, I should say, and all their staff don't necessarily understand it. They're hearing from constituents on both sides of these issues.
Yeah.
My universities tell me this is great and I need to support it. But my real retailers tell me it's the worst thing and I can't support it. They don't know where to go. And so it's going to be tough for them, to ultimately support something like that.
And what do you think the difference is between PREVAIL and PERA that allowed PREVAIL to get over the line, at least in the committee? And PERA?
I think with PREVAIL, it's a little more understandable of like what the PTAB does. You can look at the statistics. you can hear the stories from constituent groups who come in who say, look, I had this, great patent. I was taken to the PTAB, it was killed there by this death squad. We need to rein it in. Section 101, you're talking about abstract ideas and laws of nature. And I think a lot of people on the Hill, their eyes gloss over and they don't really understand it. And so it's difficult for them. The biggest debate we had as we had briefings and the like on 101 is, does this cover human genes? Like there is language in there about, it doesn't, there's an exception for human genes as they are in the human body. Don't quote me. I can't remember the exact language, but something along those lines. But well, what does it mean when it's extracted or when it's purified? And so that was some understandable chunk of the bill that offices could latch onto and dig into. Yeah. And they were struggling with it. They hadn't even touched a lot of the other stuff because it was a little more vague and less understandable to them.
Well, it's interesting because Squire's obviously been talking about how AI is the future, and that's why they've been taking some steps to kind of fix it. From his view, fix the USPTO's approach to patent eligibility. But do you think this conversation about AI, do you think that makes it easier? Like, hey, AI is actually something complicated and should be clearly patent eligible. Do you think that helps with PERA, or that's kind of
I mean, everybody's kind of obsessed with AI right now. Yeah. So I could see that getting some people intrigued. I mean, part of what undermines that, and I'm curious of Dave's view, if you say that, patent eligibility is going to prevent us from getting all these AI patents. Well, we've been told that we need the patent system because it drives innovation. It drives investment. There's no shortage of investment in AI right now. Nope. So it's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to understand, well, then why are you telling me we need to change the patent system to get greater investment in AI when billions of dollars is being invested in AI right now?
So a risky argument, you're saying.
It is to me. You're going to get questions on the back end of like, okay, explain this to me again. Like, I don't really get this.
Also, the argument has always been whatever flavor of the day. I remember the first, the set of 3 hearings. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Capo was making a big deal about, we'll never get the rollout of 5G unless we fix 101. And I'm like, I think you will. And, we did.
We did, yeah. But none of those patents, I think, have been validated under 101 yet. But I will see.
Then what's the problem? I mean, that's the other issue. Post Berkheimer, I'm not sure anything goes down on 101.
We're too busy, saying, car axles are eligible.
It wasn't to a car axle. It's to an abstract idea about a car axle.
And cameras and all that. Yeah, So I guess, Dave, do you think there's more room on PERA this Congress, or?
I doubt it. From our perspective, I mean, there have been a lot of discussions, but it's moved further and further in one direction, as far as I can tell, or at least that's kind of our view. So it's hard to see how a genuine compromise could happen at this point. I think both sides are pretty dug in. I could see Senator Tillis is an immensely likable man. I mean, he just really is. And his colleagues really like him. So I could imagine right at the end of the Congress, slips through on markup and with the understanding it's not going anywhere on the floor. But enactment, I think, is almost impossible.
And just to that point about, getting something through the committee. The other is, like my old boss, Senator Durbin.
Well, I was thinking as a law, but yeah.
But, like my old boss, Senator Durbin, Chairman Grassley is a legislator. Yeah. Like, he likes, to vote on things. He thinks that's why he was sent to the Senate. Yeah. And so he's going to want to, have a steady stream of bills on the markup agenda that he can help move. And he's going to want to see if there's something he can do for Senator Tillis, who he likes and who's, going to retire from the Senate at the end of this Congress. Senator Tillis, Chairman Grassley's staff, they do understand these issues. They do dig into them. And so I can, if they want to get hands-on and try to, mold this into something they can get through the committee, they might be able to do so. But a lot of work has gone into it already, and we're in a fairly intractable place, I feel.
Maybe if Tillis is a deciding vote on something, he could
maybe.
I want to actually go back to something you said about the PTAB, because you said, well, you could come up with some kind of proposal that the other side wouldn't agree. But do you mean just return back, or do you have something like more in sense of a compromise? Is there some tweaks that you think could be made that maybe you are not perfect, but you think could get you closer?
I hesitate to call them compromises. I mean, it always seemed to me that you should have a mandatory stay. Would have solved a lot of these problems if you had at least upon institution, have a mandatory stay. So I'm guessing that people who are users or used to be users of.
Oh, so you want to go further than it was?
Yeah. I mean, otherwise it's pointless, right? Like from, I talk to these stakeholders and like, well, like I said before, the PTO is ignoring the bill and we're going to pass another bill for them to ignore it. Like, how does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think to even get people interested, you'd have to have like very strong appeal rights. And you probably would have to have a mandatory stay of litigation.
Yeah. I mean, that is a whole other issue, right? There's a lot of controversies about district courts handling patent cases in different ways, but the name of the game is to enforce your patent. You need to find a court that's going to schedule a trial before the PTAB, or, now it might get better.
Luckily, there are two of them who will. So.
Yeah. So, but it depends on the situations, if you could do that or not. TC Harland, is that one? Made it a little harder. I guess you mentioned a lot of you're saying Tillis and Coons, and that's Tillis and Schiff. I actually watched that first hearing I think they had, and it didn't seem like Schiff was that excited about the role he was handed. But I want to get your, sense, and I was surprised, Coons, I guess he probably got a more prestigious thing, but I'm still surprised so maybe you could explain the dynamics there.
No, I mean, what I'll say is, no one really gets stuck being the chair or the ranking member of subcommittee. You have to request it.
Oh, okay.
If you look at the
I thought because he's a freshman, they kind of said that.
No, he gets his choice a little later than some others, and you're looking at things across, committees, but nobody gets to be the ranking member of a committee unless they want it.
Yeah.
I got to work with his staff, some, and start to understand a little bit about what their interest is. They are engaged on patents. My guess is he's a little more interested in like kind of the copyright side of things. He used to represent kind of LA area when he was in the House, has relationships with a lot of the studios. So I suspect his kind of driving interest in IP is more in the copyright space. I don't want to suggest he's not interested in patents. He has staff who knows it well. I've worked with them. I've spoken to them a number of times. But that's my guess, is that he's more interested in the copyright space.
And I guess what kind of impact do you think that has, or does it, or is going to go to the full committee then?
Look, Senator Tillis, he's going to continue driving this subcommittee, as he did when he was the chair and 2 Congresses ago, I guess, or 3 Congresses, I forgot exactly. But, they were the most active subcommittee we had when he was the chair. They're still one of the more active subcommittees. So he's going to keep pushing this thing. He did kind of the foreign threats hearing. He did the PERA hearing. There will undoubtedly be more patent-related hearings, but I'm sure he's going to dip into the copyright and trademark space. He's done a lot of work there around the DMCA, piracy, other things. And there are other members, while they're not chair ranking member, are interested here. Senator Blackburn on the Republican side, Senator Serrano, Coons on the Democratic side. And they'll, put in their 2 cents of where they think the subcommittee should focus. And Senator Tillis tries to build a consensus. I can see him taking their views, but I expect them to be very active right to the end.
Yeah, that's interesting because we have other former staffers who, on the clause A, and they explained the 4 principles of the 2 subcommittees have to agree, and then that's the only way things could get done. But it seems from your perspective, it's really a full team effort on whoever's the.
Yeah, I mean, the chair drives the subcommittee agenda. Yeah. They decide what hearings they're going to have. You could decide with the ranking member if you're going to have a consensus panel or if you're going to have a partisan panel. But I do. Sense that Senator Tillis, seeks the feedback of other members who are active there. Yeah. As Dave said, he's really a well-liked member. He's just a good guy. Mm. And with that, he likes to talk with his members and find out where their interests lie and see if there's something he can do for them.
And on the Senator Schiff point, he must, with the lack of seniority, I'm assuming he ranked IP subcommittee
pretty
fairly high if he got it. So
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't just choose it. He really chose it, I think.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, obviously, he has very strong divergent interests in that state.
He does. It's in California. The same thing with Dianne Feinstein. All senators from California face this on the patent stuff because they've got Qualcomm and a bunch of biotech on one side. They've got all the big tech up in San Francisco, and they just have a split state. It's impossible to navigate a lot of times.
Yeah. And somebody else from, I guess, California, Eli Issa, who I guess led, a lot of the patent reform efforts. Even after AIA, he didn't think AIA went far enough, and he thought,
"Go Innovation Act." Yeah,
there's a bunch. Anyways, I was going to say with Senator Lee from Utah. Anyways, but I guess from my understanding, he's term limited. And is my understanding correct? Or
who's term limited?
Eli Issa, or no?
I won't pretend to know how the term limits work for chair and ranking member. I think the more pressing thing is the redistricting that happened in California.
Okay, so he's
so I'm not going to pretend to know California politics and how red versus blue his district now is, but everything I've read suggests he's going to have a much tougher district than he used to.
Maybe, although he could still win. He's already been redistricted out once, right? Well, and then it came back to Congress.
That actually reminds me of the other congressman who's became interested in Kevin Kiley. I think he lost his district.
I think it was broken into like 5 or 6 pieces or something like that. So he has to decide where he wants to run.
Yeah, and he's a big pro patent guy. I think he's a former litigator.
I think a former REL litigator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he learned from the best. Yes. So, but anyways, I guess it seems like the House has been taking pretty much of a backseat for a while now on patent issues. At least that's been my perspective. But I guess, where do you think is going to go this Congress, or I guess let's start with this Congress, and then maybe next Congress.
It's really, that's a hard one. Whenever we would look at these bills like PREVAIL, we're so focused on, can we get it, through the Judiciary Committee? Can we get it through the Senate? As you said, Chairman Issa on the other side has a very different view of something like PREVAIL. And we would be doing all this work for something that, even if we got it through the Senate, was just going to die over in the House anyway. I find it hard to believe. I hate to always be the pessimist, but I find it hard to believe there's a lot of common ground, between the folks who really care about patents in the Senate and, the Darrell Issa's of the world in the House. They might be able to find some things around the edges, or maybe they can find things in other spaces, like, I mentioned copyright piracy earlier. But just, the Senator Tillis, Senator Coons, what they've been working on in the Senate, it's just very different than what Representative Issa's been working on in the House. And there's not a whole lot of overlap, but curious what Dave thinks.
I think there's not a whole lot of overlap. I mean, the one scenario where you could see something potentially happening, although it seems like a very, very long shot and probably almost impossible, is, if the PTAB really has been dismantled, maybe one side's desperate and the other side's willing to talk. I don't see it, but I don't know. My understanding is that Chairman Issa is a little aggravated by the current situation, and he has historically been energetic on these issues. So
and to that end, I think it'll be really interesting, not just with Chairman Issa, but there are members of the Senate who were here and voted for the AIA, right? And eventually, Director Squires is going to come over and have a PTO oversight hearing. He'll have one in the House. He'll have one in the Senate. And it'll be interesting to see what questions come, even from people who might have been supportive of something like PREVAIL. They might not be happy that the PTO is just doing this on their own. So the questioning there, I think, is going to be really interesting. And that's going to come before too long, is my guess. I mean, doubtful this year. We have so little time.
Not happening this year.
But next year, wouldn't surprise me if it happens relatively early.
It certainly should. And there are a bunch of members. I mean, Chairman Grassley was there, voted for the bill. Senator Lee was there and voted against the bill. Senator Coons was there. He voted for the bill. So there are a lot of members still who took that vote. And it was like 93-5 or something.
Yeah, it was pretty lopsided.
It was very, very lopsided.
Yeah. Well, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but since if it is Darrell Issa's last term in Congress, then he might be open to something more creative. I know his top staffer, John Lee, I think he's publicly talked about that maybe there's a new framework to look at these issues, not just look at PTAB and 101, maybe something on China, and then you could deal with these issues as part of that. you just came from the Senate. Do you think something like that is? Do you think the Senate can get creative enough to meet them there?
It's tough to envision exactly what that is. I feel like people, put out China and it's like, oh, we need to do something to take care of China. And it's like, that can mean a million things.
Yes.
And so kind of herding those cats to do some sort of grand bargain in the limited time, frankly, that there's going to be next year. It's an election year.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of work gets done after July. And so I think it's a short amount of time if you want to get something significant done.
You could imagine. I'm a little surprised the Fitzgerald bill hasn't gotten more traction in the Senate. I would have thought one of the China hawks would drop it, because that one, I mean, there was some opposition, but I think at this
What
point,
is the bill?
So the Fitzgerald bill would bar applicants who are on the entities list from receiving patents at the PTO, and there was also some ambiguous language that I think was intended to prevent them from asserting their existing portfolio, although the language wasn't entirely clear.
From some foreign entity.
And I was just saying, not exactly the same as that, but a little analogous. I think Director Squires put out the other day a show cause order in a PTAB case asking a Chinese entity, why should I institute a PTAB proceeding in favor of a party that's on the entities list?
Funny, I'd asked that very question. I was saving it up, and now he's gonna deinstitute, and I'll lose that talking point.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But no, I've certainly seen that legislation that Dave was talking about, and maybe something targeted in that way.
Yeah, I think it would make. I mean, people have always been loath to disrupt trips, but at this point there's no appellate panel at WIPO. There are no challenges, and all the tariff stuff I think has blown up the rules-based kind of trading system. So whereas we had maybe not huge concerns, but some concerns with that bill like maybe 2 Congresses ago, now we're like, okay, this is not going to make things any worse in terms of how trading partners are going to react to it. And so I can see that going, and honestly, it's kind of interesting. Usually, when they do, as you know from your previous firm where you compiled all the data for the top 300 patent owners, I mean, you usually attribute patents to the ultimate kind of beneficial owner, which is the right way to do it. If you do that with China and the state-owned enterprises, which is basically all of them, even the ones that are not necessarily formally owned. I mean, China is by far the largest recipient of U.S. patents by like an order of magnitude.
Yeah. And that would help with the backlog issues. So
that's true. It'd be a lot of applicants, or you just get rid of continuations. That would cut a third off the backlog.
Yeah.
Dave and I used to love to talk about continuations.
Continuations, they just need to go away.
So before we get to the final question, one topic, I guess you mentioned, you think Lutnick is driving a lot of these like pro-patent efforts at the USPTO. Some of the other things that have been reported, from the Wall Street Journal, people in stakeholders in the patent community are a little worried about, including the proposal that supposedly he floated about, some kind of tax on patent value. I guess I'm just curious about your members actually get, as you've reminded me many times, get the most patents out of anybody.
Yeah.
So I guess what is their thinking about a proposal like that? And what is their thinking about a proposal like that? And I guess how do you think? I'm just curious about how would they react if something like that came to pass in terms of practically? Yeah.
I think we need to know a lot more about, for example, how the valuation would happen, how big the tax was. I mean, it is not insane to suggest that assets be taxed. I mean, that's something that happens in everyday life. I think in the patent context, people were uncomfortable with.
But what's like you mean like besides like?
Well, do you pay taxes on your car, your house? I mean,
okay,
yes, right? I mean, no. I mean,
but I guess to me, it's like, aren't they already paying a corporate tax?
You're using your house here for business purposes. Yeah. I mean, presumably, I hope you're paying your taxes.
We'll cut this part out.
So, if not, IRS, you should be.
No, we were joking around that it's probably Montgomery County. I'm not sure I could do this.
So yeah, I don't think that bars. I mean, assets are taxed all the time. I think it did freak some people out, but it really would matter what was in it, right? For example, let me give you an example. If they decided to increase the marginal rate at which judgments were taxed, I think my members would probably be fine with that. And that is a patent. But I mean, that's a situation where the patent's been adjudicated. It has not been held invalid. And it's, the damages have been valued typically by a jury. So you know exactly what that judgment is worth. And it would be very easy, administrable. You could totally do that. I don't know if my members would support it, but I could see that happening. The real challenge is if you've got something like, I think 3.5 million U.S. patents in force.
Yeah.
The administrative task of actually individually kind of assessing their value would be impossible. Yeah. It would be, even with like 100 patents, it's more or less impossible in litigation. But with that many patents, you couldn't do it. So it's unclear to me how this would work, how it would be implemented. Would it be implemented as an additional fee at the PTO, or would it be something completely different? I mean, there are just a lot of unknowns.
And that's, I mean, the first thing that came to mind when I saw, this reported in the Journal or wherever it was Dave's last point there of like, it is incredibly difficult to value a patent and how you're going to go about trying to value these things so that you can, put some tax on top of it. And, your initial question, Dave's response about how a lot of his members are the biggest patent holders and what would that mean for them? Well, also, this administration has tried to, drive down the cost of prescription drugs. Well, those prescription drugs rely on, the brand name drugs rely on patents to be on the market. This seems to be at cross purposes to each other, right? Yeah. If you're going to then, tax those assets. So, I'm always interested to hear a Republican administration talking about levying new taxes. This is it's really tough to see how this one would work.
And the budgetary impacts would likely be enormous if it was meaningful. That the CBO, it was never made public, although the Wall Street Journal got it somehow and reported it a few years back. But
was this part of the hack of the CBO? Is that how you got this information?
Yeah, no, it was China. It was just like, no. Wall Street Journal, I didn't get it. No, it really wasn't me in this case. But yeah, the CBO scored. So there was a proposal to basically carve Hatch-Waxman patents out of IPRs. And the CBO scored that, I think, at over $1 billion in terms of budget impact, which is not nothing.
Yeah. I guess, well, let me know, have you heard anything since the report to suggest that it's moving forward in some concrete way?
I have not. It struck me as just like a stray comment, but maybe something's bubbling up behind the scenes.
I don't think it was a stray comment. I'm pretty sure this came up in interviews with potential directors. Yeah. So my sense, from what I hear, this is something that Secretary Lutnick has had an interest in, but I haven't heard any details. And it's been a while now. Yeah,
I've said, it's he is very aware of patents. It might be a good thing and a bad thing, depending. So, so some final questions. We've talked a lot about issues. Is there anything, and Jeff, maybe we'll start with you. Anything that we didn't talk about that you think people should be thinking about when it comes to the patent system, and any predictions about, I guess, what might happen?
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see kind of how things play out in IPRs and what the reaction on Capitol Hill is going to be. That's kind of the thing that's top of mind. There are a lot of smaller proposals out there, more industry targeted things, addressing things like patent thickets or, things like obviousness type double patenting. And when you tie patents together, how should those be litigated? I could potentially see,
which the previous administration tried to do without legislation.
Well, without legislation, yes. But,
PTO doesn't need legislation, apparently.
I don't know that I would bet on any of those things passing, but, maybe starting to build some momentum, draw some attention. But I don't have high hopes that anything significant in the patent space is going to get through Congress.
Or anything at all, for that matter. Well, the number of bills that Congress kind of passes through both chambers now is very, very low.
And it's, in the space you need to, you watch really are when there are big, government funding packages, the National Defense Authorization Act. Sometimes you can attach small things to them. There was kind of a commercial scale piracy bill that was slipped into the NDA or a funding bill a few years back. You know, so some of the more targeted things you might be able to slip into a package like that. But I know House Republicans have been a little more resistant to legislating in those big packages. So
that's interesting. It makes me think like if maybe the side that wants to pass the one-on-one legislation, if they made a bit less of a deal of it, they could have pretended it was just a small issue.
that one I have a hard time believing it'll get through.
When you try to do that, you usually get caught. We had some changes to ITC practice, and we just kind of slipped them into one of the appropriations bill, and Senator Hatch was the appropriator. And we heard about it.
Yeah.
David, I guess anything you think might change or
I think it's going to be interesting times. I share Jeff's pessimism about legislation. That just doesn't seem likely. But having lived through the AIA, and it's funny, it's not just me. I've talked to some of the other old timers, kind of old political hands who kind of went through it kind of with me. And everybody kind of independently is kind of thinking the same thing, which is there's going to be a patent war in 5 years. Like there's going to be something big. There probably have to be some triggering event, some, $1 billion, $2 billion, somebody has to write a huge check and then CEOs get involved. And, 10 years later, maybe we'll have something, some sort of new legislation. But I do think that the path that we're on now is just untenable. I mean, again, having lived through the pre-AIA days, I just can't see this not backfiring at some point down the road. And it takes 2 or 3 years before these judgments start coming in and you actually get to trials on all the patents where institution was denied. But I think there's a pretty good chance that something will happen. I don't know what it is. And maybe it'll just be timed, it's going to take 3 years anyway, just when this administration goes, maybe that's the transition point. But I can't see things lasting how they are.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the interesting things, I don't know, writ large about this administration, but if we want to focus on just the patents, this pretty drastic change to the PTAB happened very early in this administration. Yep. There is still a lot of runway. So, does this administration pull things back? Or if not, you've got 3 years of this to play out. And you'll start seeing some of those judgments. And, I'm not saying that the next presidential campaign is going to be fought over the PTAB. Like I'm not as crazy as that, but I can envision people who are, donating to campaigns, saying like, hey, this is something that's important to me. Once this new administration steps in, you got to fix this.
And I think that one of the more interesting questions will kind of former petitioners even want the PTAB back? Right, given their current experience. And I don't know the answer to that. I think some of my members do, some may be more skeptical, but if there isn't kind of the institutional knowledge of the PTAB left, a lot of the good judges have gone, and in 3 years, I don't know who will be left. I mean, not that they don't have good judges now, but if they really deprioritize IPRs, people are not going to stick around to do ex parte appeals. People who went there to decide IPRs.
Yeah, and we didn't get to that. Obviously, the current administration is part of the revision is to ramp up the central reexamination unit, and hopefully that's
good. 10, 15 years later, after you've settled your case.
Well, they put the chief judge, and I think they're trying to ramp it up. So,
and the vice chief, they transferred 2 of them down there.
All right, so a few final. We want to get some of your last wisdom, some advice. Jeff, you in the beginning you talked about how you actually ended up your job, and part of it you sent out your resume. Any advice? Somebody listening to this and they're like, hey, that'd be pretty cool to go on the Hill. And
my advice is don't.
I would say the opposite. Working in the Senate was the best job I ever had.
Yeah.
Now I've left the Senate.
Tell Judge Chen you said that, and it's recorded.
He'll take quite offense, but I obviously left the Senate, so my time had kind of come to an end. But it was fantastic. Yeah. And so if there's anybody who's interested, for one, do it. You're not going to regret it. If you want to get onto the Hill, you need to just go down there. You need to set up coffees with people. You got to cold call people and tell them you're interested and give them your resume. And you just don't know when you'll ever get a call back. When I got a call who's, saying, hey, this is, I won't say her name, but this is so-and-so from Senator Hirono's office. We'd love for you to come in and an interview. I said, great. I got the time. I hung up the phone and I said to my wife, I've got an interview at the Senate. And she said, with what office? And I said, I'm not sure. It was just, I was so excited to get it. I wasn't even thinking about the member, so, be open, get down there, meet with people. Because while you could send your resume into some mailbox, just like any other job, if you've got somebody who can put it at the top or, give you a recommendation, it's the way to do it.
Did you know somebody who do you know like who?
It was so my boss when I was with Senator Durbin, the staff director of the committee, Joe Zogby, greatest guy ever.
Yeah.
I had met him through a mutual friend. I visited him in the office one day, told him I worked on patents. I wanted to work on the Hill. And he said, oh, great to meet you. Sure. I'll put your name in for something. I assumed I'd never see this man again in my life. But he handed my resume to his friend in the Hirono office and it went from there.
That's great.
Although the number of jobs available doing this, I mean, typically you've got one or two councils in the Dems and one or two Republicans in the Senate, and that's it. And then House is kind of similar. So it's Jeff and I got very lucky to be able to do what we did.
They especially they hire a lot from the USPTO's details, so that kind of
they used to.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any detailees
from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
This administration kind of cut that off.
Some from DOJ are still out there, but nobody from the PTO.
We used to have like assistant U.S. attorneys would come do the crime issues. And...
since you're here, maybe what advice would you give to Jeff about transitioning back to the private sector?
I don't have any. He's doing fantastic. He's probably making like 3 times what I am. He's better looking. He's smarter. I don't think he needs my advice.
I was gonna say I don't need his advice.
Well, he still misses the Senate so much. How does he get over that?
Just don't miss it. Just, walk away. Don't look back.
No, thankfully Dave answers my calls. He returns my emails. We go out to lunch, once a month or so. So I get to pick his brain there. I'm a pretty lucky guy.
And I should mention you're at FGS Global now. So.
That's right.
One last question I guess I always ask, there's obviously a lot of people who listen to this podcast that are not fully happy with the patent system. And they're like, what can I do to, impact the overall direction of patent policy? Any advice for somebody in that position about what they...
preferably somebody's paying you to do it, but, go down, talk to your members or come down to the Hill. As I said,
I'm actually thinking more of like somebody, I don't know, who has a patent or is being sued by a patent holder, from whatever perspective.
You should let people know, on the Hill what your issues are. The number of companies that come in and explain the plight that they find themselves in, whether it's they think they've been brought to the PTAB unfairly, whether they think that they were sued unfairly and they're being, harassed by some patent owner. Patent issues aren't top of mind for a lot of offices, but when they hear these anecdotes, these stories where they think somebody's being mistreated, they do latch on to that. And sometimes that drives somebody's position on bills.
Drives a lot.
It does. Look, you can litigate these things. You can write articles. You can do whatever you want, but I really think that personal voice on the Hill makes a world of difference, because otherwise members and offices aren't necessarily going to engage on these issues unless you could explain to them in a personal anecdote of why they should.
But you have to be a sympathetic character, right? Yeah. So you can't be big tech going in and say, this is going to cost billions of dollars. People say, well, you've got billions of dollars. So, so that's all right. So if you have a sympathetic story, I totally agree with Jeff.
But even if you're a big company and you can talk about, I have a facility in your district and I'm not going to be able to put as much into research and development or whatever it may be. These things, they do matter, or if you've been, some foreign entity has come after you. There are ways to shape these things to make yourself sympathetic. Less so when you're some big giant company, but you can make it work. And you used to bring your members in to talk to me at least once a year. And I'd like to think that I gave them full respect and listened to what they had to say. And
they wonderful. Yeah.
They certainly colored my view on these things.
Oh,
so
well, good. I will let them know. We had an impact.
If you want to say who was more effective and less effective.
Yeah, if you want to name specific members.
I won't name specifics, but, I'm not going to, don't mean this to be a commercial for, Dave Jones and HTIA, but Dave does a great job really engaging on these things. Yeah. And He's willing to engage you in a debate and provide you data of why your position might not be the right one, without being a jerk in doing it. And Dave can be a jerk when he wants to.
Yeah.
I'm surprised to hear that.
But no, I mean, there are lots of people who are effective here. Others less so. I won't name names, but.
All right, Dave, unless you want to add anything to that.
I think I'm good.
Well, thank you so much for joining Clause 8. It was a blast as always with you, and it's great to have you on.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks
you.
for the invitation.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
This was awesome.